Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Tanks with the Mighty Jingles. And today's video sees the return, and it's only been a week, of Sergeant Broken Rubber. He's back. He's not top tier this time, however. This is a tier 11 standard battle here on the Fjords map, and he's in a tier 10. And it's a tier 10 I have never heard of, which isn't surprising in World of Tanks and hasn't been for several years now. A brief investigation revealed that this is in fact a tier 10 Czechoslovakian reward heavy tank, which by all accounts is pretty good. By all accounts it's pretty well balanced, it's got strong armour, good gun handling, a nicely balanced 122mm gun and fairly good mobility. Honestly, the first time I saw this, which was today, I thought it was a medium, because it looks like a medium, it's got the mobility of a medium. But I suppose as long as you're just making shit up, you can have a heavy tank do whatever the hell you want. Equally, although not to the same degree as Sergeant Broken Rubber's performance in last week's potential world DPS record video, the actual stats of the tank that he's driving are not actually what's going to be important here. Although they are more so in last week's video, particularly the strong turret armour. But again, it's more about, well, everybody else rather than him. He just happens to be there taking advantage of everything. Not to the same degree as in last week's video, which apparently was a result of World of Tanks just giving away tier 10 tanks to complete and utter noobs. Which once you realise that that's actually a thing that happens, last week's video becomes a whole lot more understandable. This week's video is nowhere near as bad as that. There is actually a fairly impressive fight going on here. He's not just firing the gun until the barrel starts glowing white hot into the flanks of completely oblivious enemies who just sit there and take it. Although it may be because that's down to the nature of the actual physical geography of the engagement. It's not possible for that to happen on this particular corner here on the Fjords map. So we do end up with something slightly more balanced. It's still a whole bunch of people just lining up to see who can empty their pockets at the opponents faster, because that is of course the reality of high tier battles here in World of Tanks and has been for time immemorial. But just as I'm sure many of you were probably expecting the gameplay to bog down in a whole bunch of extremely heavily armoured and armed tanks, go and hold down and trade in shots with each other through this narrow canyon, the enemy team actually make a move, and by some miracle the one making the move isn't just abandoned to die while the rest of the teammates just sit there and watch him do it. They are actually mostly all going for it. We may actually have a fight on our hands here. Now, while this is all very, very unusual and actually kind of exciting, I just want to draw your attention to what's going on behind them. Because while Sergeant Broken Rubber's team do have the score advantage, a lot of those kills have actually occurred elsewhere on the map, and the fight here on this corner is not going particularly well, which is what makes what's going on behind these guys all the more potentially catastrophic. So here's where I'll wind the clock back about a minute, and this time I want to draw your attention to the minimap. You see the T110E5 to the rear. You see how he's blissfully unaware of the enemy KR1 that's just appeared behind him. That's a tier 11 heavy tank, and it is now behind all these guys, taking apart the T110E5 at its leisure. And the action up front here is so intense that, well, these guys could all be forgiven for completely failing to realise that there is a tier 11 heavy tank behind them, and they are now caught in the jaws of a vice between all of the enemy heavies in front and the fresh enemy heavy behind them. And now back to the present. Things are getting increasingly desperate on this corner. There is now a tier 11 heavy behind them, and Sergeant Rubber, having eaten his body weight in gold, is now struggling to hide behind this rock and fight off the onslaught coming from ahead, probably completely unaware of the potential onslaught coming from behind. But, you know, even if he is aware of the KR1 behind him, the KR1 is the T110E5's problem, at least for now. Sergeant Broken Rubber and his few surviving badly beaten up teammates over here have much, much bigger problems right in front of them. The rest of the team have basically annihilated the rest of the enemy team in their relevant sectors of the map, but that's not much help to Sergeant Broken Rubber and his few surviving teammates down here right now. They're all desperately still fighting tooth and nail for their survival. Again, not entirely dissimilar from last week's video, he does seem to be living something of a charmed life with the enemy team, for some bizarre reason. After pumping him full of his own body weight in gold, they just suddenly decide to start ignoring him. Meanwhile, that KR-1 just destroyed the T110E5 behind him, who it turns out did put up a pretty spirited resistance. That does, however, mean that first Sergeant Broken Rubber himself and then that T-57 Heavy should be experiencing some extremely unwelcome surprise butt sex from the enemy Tier 11 Heavy KR-1 behind them. And yet they're not. In fact, they're so not, he's actually managed to go undetected and is now being threatened with some unwelcome surprise butt sex from a friendly tank destroyer that I've never heard of and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. He's gone AFK. Why? I mean, it was too little too late. He was never going to be in position to win the game. Mostly, I'm assuming, down to the surprisingly tenacious defence of the dead-friendly T110E5 parked in front of him. So while that meant he was never really going to be in a position to win the game for the team because he just took too long killing the T110E5, why is it that he went AFK right when he was in the position to start doing the most damage possible to a largely unaware Sergeant Broken Rubber and T-57 Heavy who were engaged with enemies to the front? I mean, it's entirely possible that he just suffered an internet disconnection, or, you know, there's any number of reasons why people can go AFK. It doesn't necessarily mean that they just rage quit. But yeah, that was a rage quit. There he is, Button Man, third highest scoring player on the team. He managed to do 3,100 damage up to that point, and he was in a position to start racking up cricket scores against Sergeant Broken Rubber and the rest of the team. It was that T110E5, however, that kind of cock-blocked him, and at the point where he killed the T110E5, it was already over. And that's where he threw all of his toys out of his pram, spat out his dummy, and rage quit the match. And you can tell that he didn't just press escape and quit the battle, because if that had been the case, if you actually rage quit in the middle of a World of Tanks battle, you basically get no rewards. So if he'd done that, he wouldn't have even received the paltry 331 experience that he did. No, he was there. He knew what he was doing. He was just refusing to take further part in the battle. I mean, I could be wrong, but you know I'm right. Anyway, Sergeant Broken Rubber, thanks again for sending this one in. An amazing and very, very close, tight fight for the corner there on Fjords. Good to see. However, if you could just possibly arrange to send things in that last a little bit longer next time. I can't keep pushing out sub 10-minute World of Tanks videos. Thanks. That would be great. Anyway, I hope you all, despite the length of the video, enjoyed it. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.